That Friday night was the culmination of a long, draining quarter. The kind of corporate holiday party where the cheer feels mandatory and the air is thick with forced pleasantries. I was leaning against a pillar, nursing a drink, and trying to blend into the background. When I first had a real conversation with Isabella, she was the wife of my boss, Charles Whitman, a man whose orbit I tried to carefully navigate. I knew she was usually at these functions, a beautiful, quiet accessory to her husband's booming success. I had never given her much thought beyond acknowledging her elegance. She was probably in her early 40s, but carried herself with a grace that seemed timeless. To me, she was always just Mr. Whitman's wife, nothing more than that. But tonight he was holding court across the room, and she was standing alone near the vast window overlooking the glittering Philadelphia skyline. She turned and our eyes met. She offered a small, tired smile. "It's quite a scene, isn't it?" she said, her voice softer than I had imagined. I found myself walking over, drawn by a pull I couldn't explain. We started talking and the conversation was surprisingly light, easy. But as the minutes stretched on, I saw her facade begin to crack. She spoke about the city, about how it changes, and how sometimes, even in a room full of people, you can feel completely isolated. For a few moments, I forgot I was speaking to my boss's wife. It was just her and me, sharing a moment of unguarded honesty. The way she looked at me, really looked, suggested she was genuinely interested in what I had to say. That's when something inside me shifted. I started to see her differently. There was a whole person there, separate from the role she played. The party wound down and people began to trickle out. I saw Mr. Whitman clap a partner on the back and head for the exit with a group of senior executives, not even glancing in his wife's direction. I was getting my coat when I noticed Isabella was still there, a solitary figure by the now empty bar. I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe. I was about to leave when she approached me. "Nathan," she said, her voice a little uncertain. "I know this is forward, but my husband seems to have gotten a ride with his colleague." The cold pavement, the city lights blurred around us, creating a private world for just the two of us. Then she started talking again, her voice low and confidential. "He does that sometimes," she said, not with anger, but with a kind of weary resignation. "Gets caught up in the moment, in the business of it all. I've become part of the scenery." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. She spoke about her life before she was Mrs. Whitman, about her own ambitions and dreams that had been put on hold. She wasn't complaining, just stating facts, laying out the pieces of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her building was a grand pre-war apartment house with a uniformed doorman. We stopped under the awning, shielded from the light drizzle that had started to fall. "Thank you for walking me, Nathan," she said, turning to face me. "I really needed to talk to someone tonight." I offered a small smile, a warm feeling spreading through my chest despite the cold. "Anytime, Isabella," I said, and the words felt more significant than I intended. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that a fundamental change had occurred between us. Something unspoken had taken root, and I had no idea where it might lead. The next time I saw Isabella, it was entirely by chance. I was in a small bookstore in my neighborhood a couple of weeks later, seeking refuge from a dreary Saturday afternoon when I saw her in the fiction aisle. She was holding a book, tracing the cover with her finger, a thoughtful frown on her face. And for some reason, that simple gesture struck me. How had I never noticed how naturally captivating she was? It wasn't just her classic beauty. It was the way she moved, the quiet intensity she possessed. She seemed to hold a world of thought behind her eyes. I hadn't expected to run into her, and honestly, I wasn't sure how to act. We hadn't spoken since that night of the party, but something about that walk home had resonated with me. Something about her smile and the way she looked at me had lingered. I tried to dismiss it as a one-off, a strange moment fueled by holiday party wine and late-night honesty. But then she looked up and her eyes met mine. "Nathan," she said nonchalantly, as if it didn't matter much, but I could feel her testing the waters. I wasn't sure how to respond. I shrugged. "Not really, just killing some time." Her smile became a little more pronounced. "There's a great coffee shop around the corner. I was thinking of heading there. You should join me. It would be nice to have some company. The offer caught me completely by surprise. My first instinct was to politely decline. This was dangerous territory. What could we possibly have to talk about that wouldn't cross a line? But the way she asked with that same hint of vulnerability from the night of the party made it difficult to say no. Before I could think twice, I heard myself saying, "Yeah, sure, I'd like that." And that was it. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But later, as I sat across from her in the cozy, steam-filled coffee shop, my chest was tight with a nervous anticipation I couldn't name. It felt like I was about to venture somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. The coffee shop was warm and inviting, the smell of roasted beans and pastries wrapping around us in a way that felt almost too intimate. Isabella was already there, stirring her latte, a soft hum escaping her lips. I stood at the counter for a moment just watching her. And that's when it hit me. The woman before me didn't feel like the Isabella the first knew from company functions. She looked the same, but something about her was more authentic, more open. "Go ahead and sit," she said, noticing me. "I already ordered you a black coffee." I remembered from the party. I sat down, trying not to seem as flustered as I felt. She moved with such an easy grace, as if she belonged everywhere she went. Meanwhile, I sat there trying to figure out the storm of emotions brewing inside me. It wasn't just her looks or how at ease she seemed. It was the way she made me feel like I was more than just a junior analyst at her husband's firm. We drank our coffee and the conversation flowed effortlessly. There were no awkward silences, no forced small talk. We talked about life and how it rarely turns out the way you plan. She spoke about her college days studying art history. When she stood up to leave, she smiled at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw something deeper in her gaze. "I'm so glad we ran into each other," she said. "It's been a long time since I had a real conversation with anyone." I didn't know what to say, so I just gave a slight nod, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. There was a current between us now, one we didn't have to acknowledge out loud. When we parted ways on the street corner, she reached out and briefly touched my arm. It was a simple, friendly gesture, but her fingers lingered for a second too long, and that single moment of contact stayed with me. "Take care, Nathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the city noise. My head was spinning as I walked back to my apartment. The afternoon had seemed so ordinary, yet it had unlocked something inside me. I couldn't put my finger on it. She hadn't done anything overtly inappropriate, but the way she looked at me, the way she listened, it made me feel like there was something real between us, a different kind of connection. I had been to the Whitman holiday parties for years, but this was not the same, and I hated how much I thought about it in the days that followed. I tried to push it from my mind, to pretend nothing had happened. A few days later, a memo went out about the annual corporate charity gala. It was a black tie affair, one of the biggest events of the year. I usually found an excuse to skip it, but this time I felt a strange compulsion to go. As soon as I walked into the opulent ballroom, I saw her. She was standing with Charles and a group of investors, a glass of champagne in her hand. She saw me across the room and her lips curved into a subtle smile as she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible wave. Without thinking, I waved back. Her smile was poised, but it held a warmth that I now recognized. An unspoken understanding passed between us, making my stomach churn slightly. "Nathan," she said as I eventually made my way over to her group. "I didn't expect to see you tonight." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Figured I should make an appearance. I didn't know you'd be here." She laughed lightly. "Oh, I'm contractually obligated to attend these." And then, almost without meaning to, I asked, "So, Isabella, how have you really been?" She paused. Her polite smile faded a little, and for a moment, I saw something raw and unguarded in her eyes. "I'm all right," she said, her voice quiet. "Just feeling a little invisible lately." Her honesty caught me off guard again. It was as if she was peeling back another layer, revealing a person I hadn't expected. Someone who was more than just a society wife. "Yeah," I replied, nodding slowly. "I can understand that. It's not always easy." She returned the nod and we stood in silence for a few moments. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, serene. I wanted to say something more, something to comfort her, to lift the weight she was clearly carrying, but the words wouldn't come. So I just looked at her, wondering how deep her loneliness ran. Charles returned with the fresh drink for her, and the moment was broken, but something inside me had shifted again. That night, my perception of Isabella was cemented. She was no longer just a beautiful woman or my boss's wife. There was a distinct light around her now, a fragile and compelling one. Later, when the event began to wind down, I found myself sharing a taxi with a few other people from the office, including Isabella. Charles had left early for a late-night strategy session. As people were dropped off one by one, it ended up being just the two of us for the last few blocks. My thoughts were fixated on our brief conversation at the gala. What did she mean by invisible? Was she just bored, or was she quietly asking for something more? As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto my couch and replayed the entire night in my head. That coffee, that conversation at the gala, it felt like a confession, that look in her eyes. It was then that I realized this wasn't just a series of coincidences. There was something real happening between us, something unspoken and powerful. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was being drawn into it. The scariest part, I wasn't sure if I wanted to resist anymore. The following few days at work felt heavy. I couldn't stop thinking. One evening, I went for a run on the Schuylkill River Trail, hoping the physical exertion would quiet my mind. As I reached the art museum steps, I saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench, looking out over the water. It was her. My heart hammered against my ribs. I almost turned and ran in the other direction, but she looked up and saw me. "Nathan," she called out, a small smile on her face. "Fancy meeting you here." I jogged over, trying to catch my breath and my composure. "I come here to run sometimes," I managed to say. "Helps me think." She patted the empty space on the bench next to her. "Me too, though I prefer to do my thinking sitting down." I sat a careful distance between us. She looked at me, her expression serious. "Charles was talking about you the other day," she said unexpectedly. The word sent a jolt of alarm through me. "Oh?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "He said you're one of his sharpest young guys," she continued, her eyes searching my face. "He said you have a bright future at the firm." The compliment felt like a lead weight. It hit harder than I expected. I'd always seen Mr. Whitman as this larger-than-life figure, the pinnacle of success. But hearing that he saw potential in me while I was entertaining these complicated feelings for his wife felt deeply wrong. I didn't know what to say. I mumbled, looking down at my running shoes. "He thinks you're doing great work." I wasn't sure what to say. A part of me wanted to confess everything, to tell her about the conflict warring inside me. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "He's a good boss," I offered, the words feeling hollow. "Yeah," she murmured, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "He's good at a lot of things." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging between us. The implication was clear. He was a good boss, a good businessman, but perhaps not a good husband. We eventually parted ways, and I walked home with my gut twisted in knots. It felt like I was walking towards something I couldn't stop. A few days later, I was working late trying to finish a report when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Nathan, it's Isabella. I know this is out of the blue, but would you be willing to meet? There's something I need to say." That simple message made my gut clench. "Yes, of course," I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. She suggested a walk in Rittenhouse Square. As we sat on a bench, she took a deep breath and looked down at her hands, which were clasped in her lap. "I think you know," she said gently. "There's been something between us, and I can't keep pretending it isn't there." I froze. Her words hit me squarely in the chest, harder than I ever expected. Of course, I had felt it, but hearing her say it out loud made it real, tangible, and terrifying. "I'm not trying to make things awkward, Nathan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to handle this, but I can't keep pretending nothing is happening." I looked at her, my mind racing in a dozen different directions. Every rational part of me was screaming that this was wrong, that I should get up and walk away. And yet, there I sat. "I don't want it to be weird either," I said. My voice strained as I tried to keep the situation from spiraling. "But I honestly don't know what you want me to say." She met my gaze then, her eyes direct and steady. We sat in silence for a long time. The quiet was thick, laden with all the things we couldn't say. Then she reached out. Her hand brushed against mine. A touch so light it was barely there, but it sent an electric jolt through me. My breath hitched, and for a few seconds I couldn't move. "This isn't just me being lonely, Nathan," she whispered. Her eyes locked on mine. "I don't know what this is, but I can't ignore it anymore, and I don't want to." A tidal wave of emotions washed over me all at once. Guilt, curiosity, desire, and fear. I knew the risks. I knew the professional and personal fallout if anyone ever found out. But the connection between us felt too strong to deny. And a part of me, a part one was afraid to acknowledge, didn't want it to stop. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice wavering. "I mean with everything, with Charles." She nodded and her fingers curled around mine, her grip firm and certain. "I'm sure." And with that single word, a unique kind of trust formed, one that allowed us to be completely vulnerable with each other while remaining completely invisible to everyone else. We built our own little world, a miniature reality just for two. But the guilt never fully went away. Every time I sat in a meeting with Charles, every time he praised a project I'd led, a sharp edge would press against the back of my mind. It wasn't that I thought he deserved to know. It was that carrying a secret of this magnitude always leaves a mark. Still, I never second-guessed the choice we made. We both made it. And no matter how complicated or precarious things became, being with her always felt right. Isabella and I saw each other whenever we could, which wasn't often. We never pushed the boundaries. We kept everything discreet, quiet, and out of sight. The hardest part was the pretense. Charles would have me over for dinner sometimes, a reward for a job well done. And Isabella and I would act like nothing more than gracious hostess and polite guest. We kept our hands to ourselves, our conversation formal. But those small moments, the quick shared glance across the dinner table, the subtle smile when no one was looking, the fleeting brush of our hands as she passed me a dish, they became everything. Those were the threads that held us together. When we were alone, sometimes in my apartment, we'd talk about what might happen if the truth ever came out. We never had a solid plan, just hazy what-ifs and half-formed ideas. But we didn't dwell on it for long. We stayed in the present, in the quiet, in-between spaces where we didn't have to justify ourselves to anyone, where we could simply be. It was a quiet Saturday evening, almost exactly a year after our relationship truly began. I was at my apartment, and she was with me, sitting on the couch where so much of our secret life had unfolded. The place was peaceful. Charles was on another one of his international business trips, so we had the night to ourselves. Everything felt comfortable now, a familiar ease that had once been so foreign. We had learned how to exist like this, quiet, careful, and deeply connected. We didn't need to constantly talk about our feelings anymore. The relationship had settled into something steady, something real. It was you have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan. ChatGPT said. Orthodox, certainly. But it had become something I couldn't imagine my life without. It doesn't feel like a year. She let out a soft laugh and rested her head on my shoulder. It doesn't, does it? She murmured. But at the same time, it feels like this has always been us. Like this was meant to happen. I nodded slowly, my hand finding hers. Yeah, it's strange, I said. But it's the good kind of strange. I never expected my life to look like this. But now that I'm here, I wouldn't change a thing. She tilted her head up, meeting my gaze with that same look that always seemed to make the world stand still. She replied softly, Me neither. Considering the circumstances, I think we've done pretty well for ourselves. I'm glad we kept it between us. Her voice was firm, certain. It's ours. It's just ours. And she was right. That was the most important part. It wasn't about anyone else. This was something we had built quietly, carefully, and together. "I'm happy," I said softly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "We're happy. That's what matters." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. We just sat there side by side, wrapped in a silence that didn't need filling. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside my window. A year had passed, a full year of hiding in plain sight. We had somehow made it work. We had kept the secret. We had protected what we had. And through it all, we held on to the one thing that mattered most: each other. As the evening deepened and the sky outside grew dark, one thought became clear in my mind. This was how I wanted things to be. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and risky, but it was real, and it was ours.